Hello! Here we are again at the Swinging Vine Zoo, and today I am going to be working on the Chinese Pangolin Habitat. So I already moved a couple of things around, so I'm thinking this area here was just some staff buildings, keeper hut, bathrooms, and so I'm gonna reorganize this area here and try to move my Chinese pangolins over here. So let's see where it goes. Okay, so the first task, of course, is paths, and just always with this park, working within the confines of the space that I've created with all of the pathing that's already established is tricky. And so right here, I'm just trying to rework this path so that I can get the maximum amount of space on that side where I'm making the new habitat, but it also flows into the other paths that are already set inside the building here for the um, what's over there? Oh, yes, the Western lowland gorillas. So I just really need that all to line up. And then putting the bathrooms back here actually worked out not too badly. As soon as I took them off the grid, they seemed to line up pretty well with the path right there. So the next thing that I needed to do was make sure that this area was going to be big enough. So I went ahead and made this null barrier set to the area that I wanted it to and plunked in the gate just to make sure that this was going to be big enough for the Chinese pangolins and that the gate was going to work within this building. So I know in the last build, in the tapier video, I had said that I was going to try to do more natural barriers in the future. And I am. I still really do love natural barriers, but for this habitat, I something else that I want to work on is the buildings, and having an entire habitat be a building, so more like an enclosure, like an exhibit, but with habitat animals. So that's the concept for this Chinese pangolin habitat. So I'm going to have the entire thing enclosed in a building, and there's going to be a section that is inside and a section that's outside, but still kind of within a caged area. So here I started out with some glass, but you'll see later that I swapped that out for some mesh. And again, using that S curved wall by flipping those curved wall pieces around for this habitat that I had used in my lemurland build. I just really like the way that it looks. I just find it really adds a lot of visual interest to a building. So even if I can do, like, this is a totally rectangle building, but just across the front, adding that S curve. Um, Makes it look like it's not a rectangular building and it just has a little bit more interest. I'm working with the gate here for the habitat. I often run into trouble when I have my building all set or my barrier all set, and then I try to put the gate where I want it to go, and it just won't click in to the barrier. And then I need to rework the barrier and move things around, or it just won't match up with the path. It just won't connect. Um, so I find that a challenge. Maybe the gate should be something that I put in first and then build the building around it. But in this case, I did have to rework the doorway kind of on an angle and build up a framework around it just to make it look cohesive as part of this building and to make it work with the gate. So here I'm moving on to dividing the space into an indoor and outdoor space, and thinking that working with these pieces before putting on the roof is so much easier. So I definitely recommend doing that if you are working on an area like this, an indoor space, especially if it's a small space or something with a lower roof. Definitely go ahead and do your indoor design before you put on the roof. Because, if you've watched my other videos or if you play the game, you might know how finicky the camera is. And when you're moving around in a small space, I always end up in the wall or the floor or in the neighboring habitat. So this was just way easier to create the design before putting on the roof. So just going back through this outdoor space and adding in the mesh, changing out those glass barriers for mesh barriers and adding in some framework around here. I later on started using mesh pieces instead of the actual mesh barrier. And already in this building, I'm using the glass in the windows instead of glass barrier. And by doing that, you just eliminate some of the degradation that happens to the barrier. So they don't need any maintenance. They're not going to break down and need maintenance and repair. So I really loved this boulder that I had created for just just a common space on the other side of the park. So I pulled it over here and just started to rework some of the pieces to make a cave for my Chinese pangolins. I thought they'd like to crawl in there just to have some quiet, be away from some of the from the guest viewing area and to have some peace. But unfortunately, later when I put the Chinese pangolins in, they actually can't get into that boulder. So later you'll see that I have reworked the boulder to create a cave that they can actually get into. Unfortunately, it's not quite as, I don't like it quite as well as the first one. But sometimes we need to make those changes so that the animals can fit in or out of certain spaces. And it just has to be a little bit bigger for them to get in or out. So I have this really cool fountain, drinking fountain blueprint by John Eros that I have used a couple of times just as is. Here, though, I am just changing it for the plants so that they match the plants in this habitat and in this biome that I'm planning on using. I'm just using some of these bouldered rock groupings that I got from Cesar Creates to sink down into the ground and create kind of a pebbled look on the floor of this habitat. And then adding some of my favorite plant in this habitat, the saltwort. And now I am moving on to the roof, my least favorite part of the build. And they are always so tricky for me, and I find they always end up looking not so realistic. So I have a really hard time with them. I never know if I should do a flat roof or peaked roof or a mix of flat and peak with the roof, and I always find they just don't end up looking the way that I hope. So you can see I start over a few times, glass, these wood planks or metal. Is this metal? Clad metal? I can't remember what that one is called. And several times just to delete the entire thing and start over. With this one, I decide to stick with this one and plan to spruce it up a little bit later with maybe some extra items on top that will make it look a little bit more realistic. So I'm just adding some more of this saltwort around the perimeter and some rock work around the outside. Since the inside was raised up a little bit so that it's at a better height, better line of sight for the guests, we've got this kind of empty space around the outside here. So I'm just adding some rocks to make it a little bit more interesting. Again, I really like spending time just adjusting the rocks, twisting, turning them, and just making them look like they blend in together and look really natural. And love this saltwort plant. I think just it really suits this type of habitat. So I've got that all around the outside and some more bracken as well. So I'm just adding some framework here to the outside area of the habitat and working with this wacky door again. So like I said, I had to just twist the door a little bit to make it work in the space. For some reason, it just wouldn't sit on the ground where I had originally wanted to put it in this lined up with the wall. So I just had to build some framework around that. And it actually ended up giving me a really good idea for the roof. So I just carried over these beams onto the top of the roof. And functionally, I'm not really sure how they would help support the roof. But visually, I thought they looked way more interesting than just the flat roof pieces. So it actually worked out kind of well, which often happens when I'm building. I do start with kind of a concept and a plan in mind, and but then I just kind of see where things go and things change and morph and develop over time. So I'm just putting in a few final touches and a few plants and enrichment items. And then up next, I have a special treat for you. You do not need to suffer through my choppy mouse controls while I am taking you on a final tour. I have actually learned how to use the cinematic camera in the game. So hopefully, this tour will be much more enjoyable for you. And up next will be our saltwater crocodiles.